All right, so this video will take us through the main concepts of the language and social context, the sociolinguistic module of Linguistics 102. Okay, so this is chapter 15 in the ninth edition of the textbook. So we open up with some information, just sort of general ideas about sociolinguistics and how we can start to look at and distinguish different varieties of language, different styles of language. And then we get very quickly into what sorts of things we're looking at. The language variation based on social distinctions. And some of the ways that we might look into this, so that we have a variationist sociolinguistics methodology, a little box that lists some of the ways that we can start to study these variations. So how do things vary? They can vary over time, right? People in the 1950s spoke differently to people in the 1980s, people in the 2000s, people right now, at any age, really. The apparent time hypothesis is a fun one, where you instead of going back and recording people in the past, or having recorded people in the past, you record people now who were at a particular age in the past. Maybe they're teenagers, they're sort of learning and establishing their linguistic identity, and you compare them to people who are at that age, establishing their linguistic identity today. It's great because it gives you some kind of snapshot of what things were like in the past, but it's not perfect because even old people change, right? Our language is changing throughout our life, so but it's an interesting proxy anyway, as opposed to real-time studies where you actually did do recording then and now, and then maybe you're planning recording in another 10 or 15 or 20 years or whatever. So language varies over time. It also varies by place, and we have some good illustrations of this and the methodology we have here. This chapter is really interesting. It goes through the facts that we learn, but along the way we learn different ways that we see different ways that we discover these facts. So we had variationist methodology earlier. Now we have dialectology, which is this sort of regional sociolinguistic study. And so we have a list of sort of steps that we go through for that kind of studying. And we learn various things about largely North American English as a way to sort of regionalize and identify different things based on where they're spoken. And why do we have regional variation? We have this section on isolation. There's linguistic isolation, physical isolation, and social isolation. Different ways that one community of speakers can be separated from another community and then start to develop independently in terms of these linguistic features that we're looking at. Of course, when you have different varieties of languages or entirely different languages, you can have contact between them. And so we talk about contact and code switching and borrowing and contact languages, right? Pidgins and Creoles and whatnot. So there's some really interesting examples there. We saw Mitchif when we were talking about indigenous languages, and we see it here again because it is an excellent example of a contact language. Okay, and then we get a whole section on distinguishing within a community based on various social factors, right? Things like class and ethnicity and gender. We speak differently, and sometimes the way we speak can reflect those ethnographic or demographic facts about us. And we have some case studies on that. There is a whole section on social interaction and language, and this is really cool. I like, we have the idea of a speech event and its different aspects, ethnomethodology. So we have studying this. I'm not going to spend a lot of time there. how societies deal with language. This is a really interesting closing section for this this chapter, where we look at, our ideas of language as a society and how that can interact with a lot of these other social influences and facts about languages, the social variation. Things like, language myths, ideas that people have that aren't true, but they believe them about language, and that affects how they interact with other people and other people's language styles. But also language policy, language planning, having an official language or more than one official language, and how does that affect the linguistic landscape of a country, a province, a society, that kind of thing. Sociolinguistics is a remarkably rich and interesting area to study. And as you can see, I didn't say a lot about it here, but as you can see as you read through, it draws on a lot of the different structural aspects of language that we've looked at before, the phonetics, the syntax, the morphology. All of these can be drawn into this idea of identifying ourselves, identifying other people, learning about identity and social relationships through the use of language and the structures of language. That's all for now.